Welcome to an era of bad ideas on wheels. These trucks promised power and delivered pain, breakdowns, rust, regret. Drivers cursed them, mechanics feared them. This isn't nostalgia, it's revenge. Number 10. The 1980 International Transtar 2, COE. Starting off our list at number 10 is the International Transtar 2 Cabover. Now don't get me wrong, International had some legendary trucks, but the Transtar 2 wasn't one of them. This cabover was introduced right when the trucking industry was starting to shift back toward conventional designs, and it showed. The biggest complaint? Ride quality. The Transtar 2 had a notoriously rough ride that would rattle your fillings loose on any road that wasn't freshly paved. Drivers complained about excessive vibration and a cab that felt like it was bolted directly to the frame rails with no suspension whatsoever. After a 12-hour shift in one of these, you'd feel like you'd gone 10 rounds with Mike Tyson. The cab access was another nightmare. Getting in and out of this thing required the agility of a gymnast, especially after spending all day behind the wheel. The steps were poorly positioned, and the grab handles felt like an afterthought. In wet or icy conditions, climbing into a Transtar 2 was taking your life into your own hands. Visibility wasn't great either, with thick A-pillars creating significant blind spots. And let's talk about the interior. It was Spartan, even by 1980s standards. The dashboard layout looked like it was designed by someone who'd never actually driven a truck. Controls were scattered everywhere with no logical organization. The Transtar 2 also had reliability issues that kept mechanics busy. The electrical system was particularly problematic, with shorts and failures happening with alarming regularity. For a truck that was supposed to be International's answer to Freightliner and Kenworth, it fell embarrassingly short. Number 9. The 1982 Mack MH Ultraliner. Coming in at number 9 is the Mack MH Ultraliner. Mack has built some of the toughest trucks in American history, but the Ultraliner was a swing and a miss. This was Mack's attempt to compete in the long-haul market with a more aerodynamic design, but it ended up being a compromise that satisfied nobody. The Ultraliner suffered from an identity crisis. It wasn't quite as tough and reliable as Mack's traditional models, but it also wasn't as comfortable or efficient as the purpose-built highway cruisers from Freightliner or Kenworth. Drivers who wanted a Mack wanted that legendary durability, and the Ultraliner just didn't deliver. Engine options were limited and generally underpowered for serious long-haul work. While competitors were offering bigger, more powerful engines, Mack seemed stuck in the past. Fuel economy was mediocre at best, which was a huge problem during a decade when fuel efficiency was becoming increasingly important to owner-operators watching their bottom line. The cab comfort was another major issue. The seats were uncomfortable, the noise insulation was inadequate, and the climate control system was a joke. In summer, you'd roast. In winter, you'd freeze. There was no middle ground. Drivers who spent weeks on the road absolutely hated this aspect of the Ultraliner. Serviceability was also problematic. Unlike traditional Macks that mechanics love to work on, the Ultraliner had components crammed into tight spaces, making routine maintenance a frustrating experience. What should have been a 30-minute oil change could turn into an all-day affair. Number 8. The 1984 White GMC Autocar Constructor. At number 8, we have the White GMC Autocar Constructor. By the mid-80s, White had absorbed GMC's heavy truck division and Autocar, creating a corporate mess that resulted in some truly forgettable trucks. The Constructor was marketed as a heavy-duty hauler, but it was more like a heavy-duty headache. The Constructor's biggest problem was its parts bin engineering. It was essentially a hodgepodge of components from different manufacturers, and nothing seemed to work together properly. You might have a Cummins engine, an Eaton transmission, a Rockwell rear end, and proprietary White cab components, all fighting with each other rather than working in harmony. Reliability was atrocious. These trucks spent more time in the shop than on the road. Electrical gremlins plagued the Constructor throughout its production run. Wiring harnesses would fail, sensors would give false readings, and the dash would light up like a Christmas tree for no apparent reason. Diagnosing problems was a nightmare because the electrical system was so poorly designed. The ride quality was punishing, even by 1980 standards. The suspension setup seemed designed to transmit every bump and pothole directly to the driver's spine. Combined with a seat that offered minimal support, long hauls in a Constructor were an endurance test. Resale value on these trucks was terrible because everyone in the industry knew they were junk. Fleet managers who bought constructors quickly learned their lesson, and these trucks disappeared from the roads faster than almost any other model from the era. Finding parts today is nearly impossible, which is probably for the best since nobody wants to keep one of these things running anyway. Number 7. The 1985 Ford LTL 9000. Lucky number 7 on our list is the Ford LTL 9000. Ford had some decent heavy trucks over the years, but the LTL 9000 wasn't among them. This conventional was Ford's attempt to compete in the serious long-haul market, and it failed spectacularly. The cab design was the first thing drivers hated. It was boxy, cramped, and felt incredibly dated, even when it was new. The interior space was poorly utilized, with a sleeping area that was barely adequate for a child, let alone a full-grown adult. Owner-operators who tried to live in these trucks for weeks at a time found the experience absolutely miserable. Engine options were limited and generally less powerful than what competitors offered. Ford's own diesel engines had a reputation for being troublesome, and many operators opted for Caterpillar or Cummins power instead. But even with better engines, the LTL 9000 was still hampered by a chassis that wasn't up to the demands of serious long-haul work. The ride was harsh and unforgiving. Road noise was excessive, and the cab would vibrate and shake on anything but perfectly smooth pavement. Wind noise was also a major problem, especially at highway speeds. Drivers would arrive at their destinations exhausted from fighting the truck all day. Build quality was subpar. Panel gaps were inconsistent, parts would rattle loose, and corrosion was a major problem in areas with harsh winters. The paint would chip and fade quickly, making even relatively new trucks look old and worn out. Mechanically, these trucks had numerous weak points that would fail with alarming regularity. The market spoke clearly. The LTL 9000 was not a success. Production numbers were low, and Ford eventually exited the heavy truck market entirely. Today, finding an LTL 9000 is rare, and that's probably a good thing. Number 6. The 1983 Peterbilt 362 COE. This one might surprise some people, but hear me out. At number 6 is the 1983 Peterbilt 362 Cabover. Now, Peterbilt makes phenomenal trucks, but the 362 COE was introduced at exactly the wrong time and had some serious issues that made drivers hate it. First, the timing. The 362 launched in 1983, right when the industry was rapidly moving away from cabovers and back to conventional designs. Length laws had changed, making the space-saving benefits of cabovers less relevant. The 362 was a solution to a problem that was already being solved in a better way. The ride quality was incredibly harsh, even by cabover standards. The short wheelbase and weight distribution meant every bump was magnified. The cab would pitch and bounce, making it difficult to maintain a straight line on rough roads. Driver fatigue was a major issue, especially on long hauls across uneven terrain. Cab access was dangerous, particularly in bad weather. The steps were steep and could become slippery. Drivers getting in and out dozens of times a day faced a real risk of injury. There were numerous reports of twisted ankles, pulled muscles, and worse, from trying to navigate the awkward entry system. The forward cab position meant that in an accident, the driver was the first point of impact. There was minimal crush zone, and serious frontal collisions often had catastrophic results for the occupants. As safety awareness increased throughout the 80s, this became an increasingly unacceptable compromise. Maintenance was also more complicated and expensive than on conventional Peets. Engine access required tilting the entire cab forward, which was time-consuming and required special equipment. Simple jobs that would take minutes on a conventional could take hours on the 360. While some die-hard cabover fans still love the 362, most drivers of the era were happy to see it go. Number 5. The 1986 Freightliner FLC 120. Halfway through our list at number 5 is the Freightliner FLC 120. Freightliner generally made solid trucks, but the FLC 120 was a budget model that cut too many corners in pursuit of a lower price point. You got what you paid for, and what you got wasn't much. The FLC 120 was built with cost savings as the primary objective, and it showed in every aspect of the truck. Materials were cheap, construction was flimsy, and longevity was not a consideration. These trucks started falling apart almost immediately, with interior panels cracking, handles breaking, and components failing well before their expected service life. The cab was incredibly basic and uncomfortable. The seats were thin and offered minimal support. The dashboard was a sea of plastic that creaked and rattled constantly. Sound insulation was virtually non-existent, so the engine and road noise were deafening. Trying to have a conversation or listen to the radio required shouting. Power options were limited to smaller, less capable engines that struggled with heavy loads or mountainous terrain. Acceleration was glacial, and maintaining highway speeds upgrades was often impossible. Drivers would get stuck behind these things on two-lane roads, watching them slowly crawl up hills at 30 miles per hour. Fuel economy was supposed to be the FLC 120's selling point, but in reality, it was mediocre at best. The aerodynamics were poor, and the lightweight construction meant the truck would get pushed around by crosswinds, requiring constant steering corrections that hurt efficiency. Build quality was so poor that these trucks depreciated faster than almost anything else on the market. Fleet managers quickly learned that the lower purchase price was more than offset by higher maintenance costs and shorter service life. The FLC 120 was a false economy that nobody should have bought. Number 4. The 1981 International S-Series. Coming in at number 4 is the International S-Series from 1981. International was trying to build a budget-friendly conventional, but they created a truck that was universally despised by anyone unfortunate enough to drive one for any length of time. The S-Series had one of the most uncomfortable cabs ever put on a commercial truck. The ergonomics were terrible, with controls placed in illogical positions that required contortions to operate. The steering wheel was too close, the pedals were oddly spaced, and the shifter was positioned where it would bang into your knee on every gear change. Visibility was poor due to thick pillars and poorly positioned mirrors. Blind spots were enormous, making lane changes and backing maneuvers unnecessarily dangerous. In urban environments or tight loading docks, the S-Series was a liability waiting to happen. The ride quality was punishing. The suspension was either too soft, causing excessive body roll and wallowing, or too stiff, transmitting every imperfection in the road directly to the driver. There seemed to be no middle ground, and either way, you'd finish the day feeling beaten up. Mechanical reliability was questionable at best. The S-Series had numerous issues with the cooling system, electrical problems, and transmission failures. These trucks spent an inordinate amount of time in the shop, which meant they weren't earning money. For owner-operators, this was a financial disaster. The interior materials were cheap and wore out quickly. Seats would sag and lose support within months. Dashboard components would break, door handles would snap off. The S-Series looked old and worn out after just a year or two of service, which hurt resale value and company image. Number 3. The 1987 Western Star 4964F. The bronze medal for most hated goes to the 1987 Western Star 4964F. Western Star built some legendary trucks for specialized applications, but the 4964F was an attempt to break into the mainstream long-haul market, and it was a disaster. The 4964F was overbuilt in all the wrong ways. It was designed with the ruggedness of Western Star's logging and heavy-haul trucks, which made it unnecessarily heavy for highway work. This excess weight meant lower payload capacity and worse fuel economy, with no real benefit for typical trucking applications. The ride was absolutely brutal. The heavy-duty suspension that worked well for off-highway applications was completely wrong for smooth pavement. The truck would bounce and jolt over minor road imperfections. After a full day behind the wheel, drivers felt like they'd been in a street fight. The cab was cramped and poorly designed for long-haul comfort. It was clearly adapted from Western Star's vocational truck lineup, without proper consideration for highway use. The sleeper berth was tiny and uncomfortable. Storage space was inadequate. The whole interior felt like it was designed for someone who would only be in the truck for a few hours at a time. Fuel economy was terrible. The heavy weight, poor aerodynamics, and truck's overall design meant it guzzled fuel at an alarming rate. During the late 80s, when fuel prices were fluctuating, this made the 4964F an expensive truck to operate. Parts availability and dealer support were also problems. Western Star's dealer network was designed for their traditional markets, not for highway trucking. Finding parts or service could be difficult, especially east of the Mississippi. Downtime was longer and more expensive than with mainstream brands. Number 2. The 1982 Diamond Rio Raider. Taking the silver medal for most hated is the Diamond Rio Raider from 1982. Diamond Rio was a company in its death throes by the early 80s, and the Raider was one of their last gasps before going under. It showed every sign of a company that had given up. The Raider was built with whatever parts Diamond Rio could source cheaply, resulting in a truck with no coherent design philosophy. Quality control was non-existent. Two Raiders built on the same day could have completely different components and configurations. This made maintenance a nightmare because you never knew what you were going to find. Reliability was abysmal. These trucks broke down constantly, and finding replacement parts was difficult even when they were new. Today, it's nearly impossible. The electrical system was particularly troublesome, with shorts, failures, and mysterious problems that even experienced mechanics couldn't diagnose. The cab was uncomfortable and poorly assembled. Gaps between panels were inconsistent, leading to air and water leaks. In rain or snow, you'd get wet. In winter, you'd freeze because the heater was inadequate and the cab wasn't sealed properly. In summer, the lack of proper ventilation turned the cab into an oven. Performance was lackluster across the board. The engine options were dated and underpowered. Transmissions were bulky and prone to failure. The braking system was marginal at best, which was terrifying when you're hauling heavy loads down mountain grades. The Raider represented everything wrong with the American trucking industry in the early 80s. Poor quality, outdated design, and a complete disconnect from what drivers actually needed. When Diamond Rio finally went bankrupt, nobody mourned the loss of the Raider. Number 1. The 1980 Kenworth Bullnose COE. And finally, our number 1 most hated semi-truck from the 1980s is the 1980 Kenworth Bullnose Cabover. Now, before the Kenworth fans come after me, hear me out. This truck earned its spot at the top of this list for very specific and very valid reasons. The Bullnose COE was introduced right at the beginning of the decade with a radical new front-end design that was supposed to be aerodynamic and modern. Instead, it was awkward-looking and functionally worse than the design it replaced. The Bullnose front end created bizarre airflow patterns that actually increased wind resistance and fuel consumption. The visibility was compromised by the unusual front-end design. The nose extended further forward than traditional cabovers, but it didn't improve the view. It actually created new blind spots. Drivers complained about not being able to see directly in front of the truck, which made navigating tight spaces incredibly difficult and dangerous. Cooling was a major problem. The Bullnose design restricted airflow to the radiator, causing overheating issues, especially in hot weather or mountainous terrain. Engines would overheat, requiring drivers to pull over and wait for temperatures to drop. This was not only frustrating but also cost operators time and money. The cab itself was cramped and uncomfortable, even by cabover standards. The forward seating position put drivers right over the front axle, meaning they felt every bump and imperfection in the road. The short wheelbase made the ride choppy and jarring, leading to driver fatigue and dissatisfaction. Maintenance access was terrible despite being a cabover. The Bullnose design actually made it harder to reach certain components than on previous Kenworth cabovers. The cab tilt mechanism was prone to failure, and if it broke, you were looking at a major repair bill and extended downtime. The market rejection was swift and brutal. Drivers hated it, fleet managers regretted buying it, and Kenworth quickly moved away from the design. Production was relatively short, and today, Bullnose COEs are extremely rare, not because they're collectible, but because most were scrapped as soon as possible. Some trucks earn respect. These earned hatred. They taught hard lessons on real roads. History remembers legends, but it never forgets mistakes.